depend on the peculiar objectives, dynamics, soft facts of the concerned family, of course. But still there will be some common theme that you might probably have seen, which can be bucketed into 3 or 4 categories. So if you can describe some structures, that would be really good.
Let me try and answer that in a comprehensive manner. Whenever you think of a structure, you look at 3 basic elements. One is management, second is control,
Absolutely.
and third is profits. When you look at management, it has nothing to do with control. So let's take, for example, you are an unlisted enterprise and you are a very large enterprise. You might have the control vested in a holding company. Then you have to comply with your NBFC regulations. You'll have your tax treaties to look at if you are going to make offshore investments, onshore investments. Who is going to control the voting power on that after the elder generation passes away? Will those shares ever get distributed? At what time will you go for an IPO? Can one family member cash out and say, I have an X share in that and I demand funds from the family? What happens if that share basket comprised of inherited wealth and not self-acquired wealth of the family? So that goes into the control box, and one could talk about it for hours. Then comes the management box. Where the management box is concerned, it's the philosophy of the family. Does the elder generation feel that at a particular age they should step out and let the younger generation come in? If the younger generation is to come in, but some youngster, bright, very, very bright, says, no, I want to do something entirely different, but because the family is so big, look after me for a period of a few years and I will get so much back to you. So he has to be given a position equal to the status of the family of a managing director, though he does not run any enterprise. He is not involved in management of what you have, but he is doing something new. Now the family has to decide to what extent should the existing funds of the family be used for these purposes. What is the capital gearing that will be allowed? Should I go to a venture capitalist, private equity, merge, get a collaboration? This is all that comes within management of your existing business, and what's the path? Forward integration, backward integration, nothing to do with control. And finally you are left with a box of profits. You have a family which might have, just for the sake of argument, 3 brothers and 3 sisters, totally 6 children. The girls have been married and gone out. They are not interested in the family businesses, but they are interested in family income. So out of the profit which is generated from the family, how much should you give them? If something has to go for charity, how much should you give for charity? So how is it that it's going to be divided when the wealth of the family is concerned? You'll have different families which are conservative, which are not that conservative, who are bright. You would have issues on what happens when, would there be related party transactions if you have businesses that are set up by the sisters or by the brothers? What happens if the things change when you become a listed company? Those issues will come up when you share profits. So to sum it up, Pranav, I think it's a combination of control, management and sharing of profits which will give rise to the structure.
Right, and have you come across, cross-border families which are spread across the world, especially some children are probably in the US, which has its own unique complexities in terms of tax laws and other regulations, and how typically those structures are built as well. I mean, there might be no estate duty in India at present. There's always been some feel that sooner or later it might be introduced or reintroduced. But there are countries across the world where there is estate duty. You find sometimes the next generation of several Indian families, generation 2 or sometimes generation 3, really residing in different countries of the world, they having legitimately a share in the family wealth, but the complexities of the regulations, laws of that country can sometimes be extremely onerous to structure those particular family wealth and whatever. So any experience surrounding that?
Let me try and answer that, Pranav. Simple things. One is, when you're abroad, you have to take care of 2 things which are extremely important. One is taxation and second is liability. Taxation is compliance with your income tax liability and your estate duty liability, particularly in countries like the United States and UK. And also third-party liabilities, particularly if you are in the medical profession where your savings can be wiped out at a stroke. So you have a structure which takes care of that. Asset protection trusts, generation skipping trusts, these are all very well-known trusts I'm sure Abhijit has dealt with millions of them, which you sort of use as a structure. At the same time, gives you the power to be able to distribute that wealth amongst resident family members also. You then have the concept, as you have in the United States, where irrespective of residence, if you are a green card holder or you're a citizen of the United States, your world income gets taxed in the United States. Therefore, you want to ensure that you are complying with the US law, but still keeping your foot in the pie on your Indian assets, so that you are in compliance with the US, but God forbid if you have to come back, you can, without having to pull out your hand in a begging bowl, say that these are the assets which I should get back. So these are typical structures which will allow you to do that. The legislation which is now coming through helps to promote that cause, but these will operate watertight, but apex in a situation where an individual, irrespective of whether he is resident abroad or resident in India, will be able to share family wealth.
So Atul, coming across to you, I mean, if we look at the exact reverse, there's huge Indian diaspora which has amassed significant wealth overseas as well. And given the opportunity that India throws up in terms of growth, a lot of them are also wanting to invest large portions of their wealth in India. Is that something also that, given the cross-border and the global nature of your network and organization, how do you deal with that, and what are the structures surrounding that you ensures full repatriability and also captures the objectives of the family?
Well, that to some extent is easier, because there are very strict, the very clear guidelines on encouraging NRIs to invest money in the country, and very properly delineated guidelines around repatriability of the gains as well. So I don't think regulation actually plays a big role there. What is key is the economic climate in the country, right? So if you're sitting in Singapore or London, when world is your playground, does India offer opportunities for you to put incremental money and generate returns, right? Now, currency depreciation is one of the biggest factors they worry about, because when they are outside the country, they are only bothered about dollar returns. So if they make 10% and if the rupee drops by 10% in a year, you didn't make any returns, right? So a stable currency environment is absolutely must for anybody to really put incremental money in India. I'm talking about NRIs. I mean, FIIs have a different consideration, but NRIs. And then, just the underlying economic activity, the GDP growth rate.
Many a times, just to interject, while regulation might not be a big deal, many a times we have seen some major lapses occurred on part of such NRIs. For example, they have built certain structures, invested in India, 5 years down the road, come back to India for good, and found that their structures really made their wealth non-repatriable, for example.
Sure.
Right. So there are very, very important aspects which need to be kept in mind there as well. Additionally, also there are tax concerns that typically, but yeah, I mean, please go on.
No, absolutely. I think, I'm just saying, comparing when you think about a resident Indian putting money abroad versus a NRI putting money in India,
right.
In comparison, the regulatory sort of challenges are, of course, you have to do basics right. I mean, right. There is absolutely no alternate for that. And that's what we talk to, when we talk to all the NRI clients, that's what we say, that one is, of course, when you are NRI, looking at the investment opportunity, but if you ever were, planning to come to India and be resident Indian, then before you think about your assets in India and start to plan around it, you have to make sure that you plan your assets abroad before you become resident Indian, right? So that's the level of complexity, that once you become resident Indian, your ability to plan for your assets abroad goes down dramatically. Whereas if you become resident, I mean, you still can really do few things around to make use of that money.
So coming over to, once again, Indians and Indian families, we have seen that a very large portion of the Indian business houses actually are controlled by family businesses, even the listed space really. Abhijit, what's your experience really in terms of how Indian families in particular compare when it comes to maybe other experiences that you have across, of how do they want to segregate family control vis-a-vis having professionalized management in their businesses? How do they want to bind together their families to ensure continuity of businesses? Are they willing to really give discretion to an external institutional trustee, or they want fixed and determinate trust rather than discretionary trust? if a certain family member wants to exit, how is that exit being provided? In terms of all these legal complexities, if you can share some of your thoughts. I know it's a question which bundles several questions into it, but please feel free to add some more questions if you feel like.
No, I'll try and answer some of them, hopefully specifically. So I think it's very complex in terms of that the Indian entrepreneur, as I said, at least the first generation entrepreneur, has a serious concern on control. And therefore, it wants to actually have, or the person wants to have as much control and discretion over whatever he or she is putting in the trust. I'm simplifying it. And the more control that you have, when the trust becomes an alter ego of yourself, the closer you are going to get to taxation. And then they don't want to even pay the tax. And that gets complex with then part of the wealth is in India and part of wealth is abroad. So we have had situations where individuals are not residents of any country. We are finding it difficult to say in which country are you a resident.
Absolutely.
And ultimately there is an umbilical cord that goes up, and that if it's to an individual somewhere, one will get taxed. If it's a discretionary trust, and if it's in hand of institutional trustees, there is a distrust in terms of putting all that, and there is a belief, at least in the first generation, that you are losing control from your hand. Not entirely unfounded. Plus this entire evolution of professional trustees, and we get asked this question again and again. Should we have professional trustees? This whole institutional environment which professional trustees bring. The professional trustees are again two parts, individuals and institutions. And this,
what would you recommend out of institutional, professional, or?
There are so many institutional, so I would have to say it's institutional, but no, but
you don't necessarily have to play to the crowd.
No, all I'm saying is that look, if it's a very secure, professionally run environment, then institutional setup works. But that's quite an exception in the Indian scenario.
And is that getting accepted amongst clients, amongst Indian families by and large? What are the concerns they see? How do you address them?
They, for example, if there is a dispute, a dispute between family is not necessarily arbitrable. I mean, you can go everything to arbitration, but if it's a commercial dispute, arbitrator will find it difficult to say whether to merge or not to merge is right, whether to do X or Y is right or wrong. And when somebody dies, assets are in hand of the trustee. And people are a little wary about the institutional setup of the institutional trustees and what kind of processes they will bring at that point of time. And the compliances in this world has become very high. The KYCs have become very high. And therefore, there is certainly a if I may say, resistance to go to institutional trustees. We will evolve. But if you see 1991, if that's where things opened up, we are in 2014. If you take the West, they are into 60, 70, 80 years of economic evolution, and therefore they have settled where they have settled.
Pranav, can I sort of just
of course.
interject
please
on this?
Feel free to.
And I say this with some of experience because we are
absolutely.
on a trustee company. Today, what Abhijit said is right. This question of the hesitancy of moving control. So the best way to start off is to have a joint trustee relationship. Because as the family goes smaller, you don't know whom to trust and whom not to trust. Your contemporaries might go before you, after you. So you retain the power for some time and retain the power to chuck the professional trustee. But if you gel together, then the transition takes place automatically.
That's interesting. And continuing with you, Dilip bhai, many a times we see, especially with Indian family businesses, that they have significant intellectual properties and several businesses housed in different entities. Can you share some experiences on how do you segregate the intellectual property from the businesses, because that intellectual property probably belongs to the family as a whole? How do you assimilate all the different intellectual properties? How do you ring fence them against liabilities? What is it that you do to ensure that there is continuity and sharing amongst the family in future of those intellectual properties? What kind of holdcos or where do you house them? What jurisdictions does one use? Whether they are partly in India or abroad. So anything concerning intellectual property, intangibles which belong to the family as a whole, how do you address those typically?
I would look upon intellectual property as special knowledge which is unique to you, which can be commercially exploited. It could be an invention, it could be expertise, it should be a design.
It could be a
Think
family
of it.
name for
it
all
could
you
be,
know.
yeah. And as the family keeps getting narrower and narrower, the people who are going to be able to exploit that know-how gets restricted. So take a simple case of the simplest of things which have been made, which has not been commercially exploited. So you don't have a market value for that property. There is nothing, whether it's the GAR provisions that come in, hope they never do, but let's assume that they do come in, or whether it is the adverse tax decisions which one is looking at, you can always park that patentable right into a favorable jurisdiction. As long as under the patent laws or on the copyright laws, it is capable of being patented, it becomes intellectual property. Once that first stage is reached, you then look out for finance. And that finance can come in through private equity, venture capital, or it can come in through the Indian diaspora which is abroad. And once they are convinced that you have something that is going to get you money, you can always collect a royalty and then share on profits. So that one is built into as an element of cost and another is a sharing of profit. And as long as you control that intellectual property, you don't run a third-party risk, because if one is putting in money in a foreign jurisdiction which you understand little about, you are happy to leave that burden there because you are getting your share of the cake by the royalty which you are collecting in a tax haven. Now, if you were to park that into a trust and have that distributed, there is nothing in India or to an Indian that prohibits you from receiving that income. Just an illustration.
Right. So I think we are really running out of time, but in the end, I would request each panelist to maybe share a couple of sentences on what do you feel about global best practices and how they are really being imbibed by Indian family businesses, and how do you see the evolving scenario unfold over the next few years in terms of adoption of the global best practices within India. Atul?
And so
May I
Pranav,
start
before
with
I
you?
talk
Yeah,
about the
please.
global press, just one thing I would like to add, and we all talked about the